Welcome to the Trad Dads podcast, where we examine cultural and political issues through the lens of traditional thought.
All right, so today I have Levi Breederland with me, and we are going to be talking about homeschooling and some of the reasons why someone might want to homeschool or not send their kids to school at all. Oftentimes we might criticize public schools or something like that, but still think that parish schools might be a good place for the kids, or some other kind of private school. But I think the issue is that a lot of times people can't afford that stuff. I know parishes are good about having scholarships and stuff sometimes, but it is an expensive option, and I think there are good reasons. Maybe I will talk about those sometime, but just briefly, the reality is the teachers are all educated in the same places. And so to an extent, a school is a school. I know a private school is going to be different in some respects, but in sort of the most fundamental ways, they're going to be very similar. So we have this article that I want to, and there's my child making lots of noise. I don't know if you can hear that, but I want to talk through this article that I'm going to put into the show notes. And it says, the title of the article is 7 Reasons School is Not an Option for My Homeschooled Kids. And we're going to go through some of them, not all of them, but how's it going, Levi? How you doing?
Not too bad. Good
deal. And so Levi has a lot of experience as a homeschool father. He has 3 kids?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I was homeschooled up until grade 8 as well, so I've got kind of the experience on both ends of that.
Right. So hopefully that's some context, and it's not just me who doesn't really have much experience with this whole homeschool thing. You're hearing from someone who has more experience on both sides of it. So I want to start with this second one that she goes through, which is titled "There's a Real Safety Concern." And so I'll just read, it's very brief. I'll just read what she says. Schools aren't safe anymore at all. Between ever increasing incidents of bullying, assaults, bomb threats, and school shootings, I honestly don't know how people can feel confident that their kids are safe when they put them on the bus every morning. I know there are people that will tell you that schools are safer today than ever, but when your local middle school has police officers patrolling the halls and parents have to have their driver's licenses scanned before entering the building, something's up. She says, I know the chances of anything major happening are small, but when it comes to my kids, I'll err on the side of caution. And I think this is interesting because it gets into something that you often hear from people who just like to defend certain orthodoxies, right? Or certain, I guess, orthodoxies of the secular religion of the age, which is, it's like, you just don't understand how statistics work. Like the statistics show that, schools are safer than ever. So you shouldn't have to worry about this, or, the probability of, this event happening is very low. And so, you shouldn't worry about it. And I think there's a couple things to say to that. And the first one is that, number one, I'm going to choose how I interpret those risks, right? So the statistics are one thing, right? And I could perfectly well agree that, you can collect data and you can form some kind of, risk rating or something like that for a given instance. But, I also have to exercise judgment on how I interpret that risk, through my own risk preference. So, first of all, just the statistics. I mean, this is why people gamble, right? It's like, yeah, of course, the odds of winning are low, but I want to take the risk. And in this case, might be the opposite. And the second thing is to say that, as she mentions here, it's like, okay, yeah, we're saying they're safer, but we've basically turned them into, something resembling a prison. Like you walk in and there's metal detectors, there's police roaming the halls. Well, yeah, of course they're safer in a sense, but now your kid is acclimated to this creepy, institutionalized environment, where they're just used to cops roaming the halls, making sure, it's like, what are they supposed to trust their teachers and their fellow students now? It's like, well, I can't trust anybody, obviously, because there's a cop roaming the halls, like just to make sure we don't kill each other. I mean,
Yeah.
it just seems like a lunatic kind of, oh, it's a lot safer. And it's like, well, yeah, if everyone was in a cage, we would all be safer, right?
I think the big thing too is like, it's not just the fact that there have been school shootings or scary incidents. Like there's always, you're always hearing stories of threats and people who've been plotting something that have been stopped and that kind of thing. But also just like on a more minor side of things, on a personal level, like you don't want to put your kids in a situation where there could be a possibility for abuse from either staff or other students, and bullying is an issue. And of course that gets thrown around a lot. Like it's in some ways it's kind of overhyped, but it is a thing. Like it's,
yeah,
we need to protect our kids, and the school system is not necessarily the best way for that to happen, because you're putting your trust in someone else, basically.
Right.
Boils
Yeah.
down to.
And I think it's kind of funny to see, recently there's been this big debate about, banning porn and stuff like this. And what's interesting is that you're seeing the usual suspects come out and say, oh, your argument for banning porn is, oh, well, think of the children. And it's like, yeah, like literally think of the children. Like, sometimes that can be used, cynically as, an excuse for, overreach or something. But at the same time, the reason why people use it is because it has a legitimate, it's a legitimate thing to say. It's a legitimate concern. Like, you should protect your children. You shouldn't just be like, well, if the market has the proper incentives for my children to not smoke heroin. And it's like, not sure about that. I don't know if you smoke heroin, so this is how square I am. How it works, but
It's still illegal in Canada.
Yes. Yeah, it's illegal. So it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Levi is Canadian. So we have the American Levi and the Canadian Levi. So that's how you can tell us apart. But yeah, so just know that things are different there. And I imagine your schools are safer because everyone in Canada is nice, right?
Yeah, we all say sorry when bad things happen, and
I love it.
I think in Canada the whole like security side of things that you definitely see in the States, I think it's less,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a bit less, but yeah, Canada tends to follow in the US's footsteps in many ways.
Right.
So the school that I went to after I was homeschooled, which is now more than a decade ago, we didn't have as much security as the public school system in that area.
Okay.
And like the public schools had more, they had like a security guard at the door, that kind of thing. But yeah, our school was pretty chill. If you had wanted to pull off a large scale incident of any kind, it wouldn't have been hard to do. And that's
right.
Looking back, it's like, oh yeah, I see the risk there.
Yeah. And I can remember things changing around the time I was in school. Like when I started high school in 2001, we knew that there was something called a school resource officer, and every once in a while I would see his car, his cop car on the front of the school or whatever, but I never saw this guy just like roaming the halls. And we never had, like if you came to the school to see your kid, like you were supposed to go check in at the office, but and of course, okay, I'm from a small town, so maybe that's part of it. But even in my small town now, it's like you have to have like a visitor pass and all this stuff, and there's so what I'm saying is by the time I left high school, this stuff was starting to come in. And now it's just so much even more. Like I feel uncomfortable going into a high school because it's like, like you just feel like you're like, there's people just ready to descend on you if you make the wrong move, and it's like, man, this is just a weird place. Okay. So the second thing that I want to discuss is her number 3, and it gets more to, the actual activities of the school itself. So she says, public education has an unhealthy obsession with standardized tests. So she says, although I pulled my kids back out of school after 2 years, my oldest daughter asked to remain in school. She was doing well and in all honors classes, so I agreed. To be honest, since I was so rigid about recreating school when we first started homeschooling, she grew to detest homeschooling. In spite of that, at the end of her 8th grade year, she asked me to please homeschool her for high school. Her reason? Our district's mania over test prep and standardized tests. These tests are a waste of time. The only thing they are successful at is stressing out students and teachers alike. I'm not willing to let my kids' formative years be wasted in order for them to be the guinea pigs of the state. Sorry.
This is a good one because like even in systems where there's less standardized testing, like the school I went to in British Columbia, Canada, there was less testing than what she's talking about for standardized stuff, and teachers could roll their own tests for more things. But if you wanted to get the official provincial diploma that you did high school, you did have to do standardized tests that all high school students did. And there were definitely teachers who, quote, teach the test.
Yeah, teach the test. Yep.
Like they're really teaching you exactly what you need to know so that you can pass this test. And you do practice exams of old tests so you can get really good at knowing how the test works and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And I don't recall it ever being beneficial, like other than to say like, oh yeah, I scored 92% on this test and you only scored 89%, like to compare apples and apples with another student. But other than that, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah. And so I think that kind of shows that the real purpose of it is for the state to know how you're doing. It's not like something like, the SAT or the ACT, where the standardized test is to place you in something. Right. And I can understand that. Even if I was just running some kind of an academy, right, I would want to know how prepared the people were coming into my program. Right. Even if I was running a technical program, right, I would want to know what they knew coming in.
Yeah, and testing everyone with the same test is a good, efficient way to do so.
Yeah, so that makes sense, and maybe even as a professor, and I don't like tests. I normally give students. My classes, to the extent that I can control it, are mainly essay based. When I can do that, sometimes exams make sense, but I prefer them to have to demonstrate things, because that's how you actually convince someone that you know something, right? Is that you can talk about it.
Yeah, the real life knowledge.
Right. Now, if I'm teaching algebra, okay, well, do algebra problems, right? So then an exam makes sense. But yeah, and it's really strange too. Like in here in the U.S., our state laws are different for homeschooling. And if you go to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which I'll put a link to HSLDA, so we're members of HSLDA, and basically what it is just a you for very cheap, you have basically a lawyer on retainer in case the government comes after you for homeschooling. But they help you understand the homeschool laws and stuff. And one of the things you notice is that one of the big differentiators between different states on homeschooling is the extent to which they still force your child to take exams, the state tests at certain years and stuff like that in school. And here in Kansas, I think there's only like 2 or 3 years out of this kid's whole 12 years in school or whatever that they're they take the big state test. But it's so funny because if the first one's in 4th grade, well, you're already preparing for it by 1st or 2nd grade. And it's like, this is just, it's myopic. It's like it's not about what a 6-year-old kid needs to do in their life at that point in time. It's about making sure they can pass this test so that the district can get money, and it just seems nuts to me.
Yeah. So, there's too much focus on it overall. Like if it was a small thing that happened and it was kind of like, at the end of the month, we're doing tests. Let's all make sure we're ready for that. But when it's kind of, had the whole year or multiple years focusing on the this test coming up.
Right.
Like that defeats the point of testing everyone in the same way and getting like a standardized result when when there's too much focus on it.
And see, this is what's funny to me about the perception of the childless or the old, um, with kids. So like your kids' grandparents, or I mean, your parents are different because they homeschooled. They had you homeschooled for a long time, but like just the average family, at least that I'm familiar with, right? Like my younger brother who doesn't have kids, or my parents who are very removed from the school system. I mean, they just have absolutely no idea what it's like. And, they're like, well, you turned out just fine. So, there's nothing wrong with sending your kid to public school. And it's like, dude, you don't know what these places are like now. And you don't know what the curriculum is like. There's been a big dust up over the new math crap which I mean, it's just like, it's whatever. I mean, it's just a different way to learn the same thing. And I mean, to me, it seems, overly, I don't know. It's just overly, I guess, graphic. It takes up a bunch of time and a bunch of room to write down these problems, and, but it's like, they just don't understand. They haven't seen these schools. They haven't been in them. They haven't been paying attention to, some of the big events and stuff like that have, really changed the way, education is done over the last, say, 10 or 15 years.
People pay their property tax or whatever is going toward the education system and don't really have any other involvement other than that.
Right. Exactly. So let's see. The next one is, she says, I could raise my own children. I never liked the idea of the schools acting, quote, in loco parentis, unquote, because even when I didn't have complete disdain for public education, I never completely trusted them. To be quite honest, when my kids were in school, I often felt like the secondary parent because it always seems like I was answering to the school rather than the other way around. God gave me these children. It is my responsibility to raise them and no one else's. So, I guess real quick, my take on that is that, this whole in loco parentis thing is just totally creepy. It's like, it takes a village is, something Hillary Clinton is famous for saying recently. And, I'm on board with that statement in general, but the problem is that the way that statement is interpreted by our betters in the government or whatever, is just totally insane. It's like, well, it takes a village, therefore, you don't get to direct your kids' education. It takes a village, therefore the village is automatically the government somehow. Yeah. And this whole in loco parentis thing, I mean, and that's part of, to an extent, a lot of the college stuff as well. And it's like, dude, these people are 18, 20 years old. They don't need, in loco. I mean, it's just weird. It's like, let them grow up. I mean, they're adults, for Pete's sake,
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, you think of someone who's in middle school, like that kind of age range, mm-hmm. and they're spending 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in the school, and then they're coming home and they're doing other things that have been directed to them by their teachers, mm-hmm. To the tune of 2 to 3 hours a day or something like that. And then it's like, well, there's
stuff like that, right?
There's that's more than 40 hours a week right there. Like, they're spending what we would consider full-time hours doing stuff either in or for the school, and spending less time with family and less time with other people. And there's the whole social aspect of that too. Like, mm-hmm. you're being raised with 30 or more people your age, rather than a good healthy mix of understanding different ages and abilities. And it's like you're sticking kids in a system that is designed for efficiency and not designed for necessarily for like the best situation for them to learn how to be a functioning person.
But Levi, we have the best psychologists in the whole wide world designing everything, just so your kid is perfectly and totally normal. And that's the word that we need to use, right? Everyone has to be normal. And to me, it's just creepy. It's dystopian, right?
It's very creepy.
It's like, well, maybe I don't want to be. I mean, well, what do you mean by normal? Because I'm not on board. Like, maybe normal is terrifying.
So with our homeschool system here, we have a person that we meet with twice a year who helps make sure that we're meeting our goals and that kind of thing. And she was saying, like this idea that everyone learns everything at the same time is
Right.
bogus. And she was pointing out, like, there's kids who are 4 who can read perfectly, and there's kids who are in grade 3, like in a homeschool setting where they're not forced to do it. Kids in grade 3 who are having trouble learning how to read. And she was saying, like, that is totally normal. And the school system says that's not normal. Everyone needs to learn on this day of the month, pretty much. Which then she went to a bunch of examples where, like, if you're forced to learn how to read and you have a disability like dyslexia, or you just have trouble picking it up, you end up hating it. And then even by the time you're an adult, you still don't enjoy reading.
Right.
And lots of things like that. Like, if you're given the opportunity to learn at your own pace, which a lot of times means faster than the school system,
right,
you learn ways to capitalize on that the school system can't teach you, because you're exploring your own abilities.
Right. Yeah. And so and so I think there's arguments 2 different ways, right? I mean, this is where we have the gifted program, that's part of special education. And then, the other part of special education that's for kids that are, a little slower. And what I think is so interesting is that, it's almost like, again, we receive this whole thing of like, oh, well, the special education system is there to make sure that, if they're, really sharp and they can, learn faster than their peers, well, then they're allowed to do that. And the special education program, it's there for them to, if they're slower, if they have some kind of disability or something, to help them out. And it completely ignores the social dynamic that is created in all of this, right? So like the gifted kids are, they're labeled the nerds, or, there's a lot of pressure on the kid themselves. I mean, and this is the way it was for me. Like, I wasn't really in the gifted programs, but I was like right on the edge. And I can remember, people telling me like, oh, well, you're smart, right? How come you're not in the gifted program, or how come you're not doing this, right? And it was a lot of pressure, and I think it maybe had something to do with my career choice later on in life, but it really does profoundly change your psychology. And then you look at, and now I'm thinking things a little differently. My oldest has some issues, and he needs some special education stuff. And it's like, once we started seeing that, and so my son, he goes to our parish school, and he receives services from the school system, and it has been a giant mess trying to deal with the people in the school system, the special ed folks. They, like, in some, like, last year they were pretty good, but then this year he's at this different school, and they're just a mess, and just creating all kinds of stress and just weird things about, you obviously know about funding and stuff like that. But, I can remember the kids when, in high school or even middle school and stuff, who were a little slower, and they were in those special ed programs. And what I think these people just don't understand is like how profoundly that affects the social situation. You know what I mean? Like, these kids are not even, are not normally kind of even allowed into the sort of normal, public area of the school, right? In the sense that, like, the other students have considered them, dumb or something like that. And they're mocked, they're made fun of mercilessly, and they're labeled for the rest of their life. And then you talk to them later on in life, and they're doing some kind of blue collar job, right? And, it's like they just have an attitude that like, I'm dumb and I don't know how like, I don't know, it's some kind of a inferiority complex, for some of these people.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't want to put my kid through that. Like, okay, yeah, if he's not, as smart as, the average person his age on, reading, writing, arithmetic or whatever, I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? The main thing is that he's my son or, my daughter or whatever, and he's a person, and he can accomplish what whatever he can accomplish, and that's totally fine. And that shouldn't, he shouldn't go through an institutionalized system that is almost, I wouldn't say designed, but is highly likely to give him some kind of weird complex.
Yeah, it's like the treatment that he gets isn't necessarily bad, but like the treatment by the system, like to give him tutors and special situations to learn, but just the social issues that appear. And like I remember in the school that I went to high school at, they had a classroom that was just for the people with a learning assistance of some type or another, and I had a friend who was in that system, and yeah, it was like he was not in a lot of the normal classes because he was getting one-on-one education, and not that the one-on-one education was bad for him, but it was just like he didn't get the same environment as everyone else, so he was automatically seen as different,
right?
And I think that definitely affected his experience throughout high school, and like he definitely had less friends and more of a person who kind of had to rely on his own processes, because there wasn't people who were familiar with him, because he was kind of not there all the time.
Right. Well, so I've got three more I want to cover here, and I think we're going to go pretty quick through the first two of them. So number 5, she says, my kids began to have behavioral issues when they were in school. She says, like me, my kids aren't perfect. One thing I did notice, however, when they were in school was that their attitudes completely changed. They talked back, they argued constantly, they started using street slang, and basically lost their zest for life. This happened for 2 reasons. They picked it up from their classmates, and they were so tired and overstimulated from being in school all day that they literally didn't have the energy to try to behave. Trust me, I refuse to go through that again. And so, I mean, my kids aren't old enough to, I don't know. And my oldest is he's 8. So, I mean, he is, I haven't really seen this from him because I think, it's a Catholic school, they're, it's a small group of kids, and I think they do a pretty good job of kind of, and he's not, there's no social media, there's no, there's none of this kind of garbage. But I can remember, I mean, he was having a real problem with, like, fighting kids and stuff. And so I think it's just because he didn't, because you're just put in these weird situations, right? Where you're, you're in a big group of your own peers, right? And so there's just
weird situations that you're not going to experience after school ever again.
And so you have to figure out how to act. And it's like, well, see, he just needs to learn how to act. He just needs a classroom experience. And it's like, no, he doesn't. Like, he's not going to be, like, most likely sitting in a factory his entire life, which is really the reason why the school system is the way it is in the West, right? We all picked up on the Prussian model. I don't know if it's, I mean, maybe that's the way it is in Canada, but, we picked up on the Prussian model with the bells and everybody lining up, and, all this stuff was to teach your kid how to be a good, sort of manufacturing employee. I mean, that was the point. And so it's like people don't understand that history. And so, and they've never read Dewey, right? They've never read these, like, psychotic progressive idiots that, were the foundations of the school system. And so they just take it for granted. But so I don't know, what do you think about this? Like, did you notice the transition, like, from when you went from being homeschooled to going to high school and all of that?
I definitely, so when I went into school in grade 8, or 8th grade, as you Americans say, and I definitely noticed that I didn't have certain social traits that most of the other kids had. Like,
you weren't normal.
Yeah, I wasn't normal. Like, the school I went to was a private Christian school that were required to have a letter from your church saying that you were an active member. So everyone there was assumed to be Christian, and that was definitely something, like a reason why my parents picked that school.
Right.
But there was things like in grade 8 where kids were using language that I had never, like I had maybe heard on odd movie here or there or something, or out in public, but yeah, language that I had never used, and not like really vulgar swear words or anything, but just like stronger language and things like that, like the street slang, like in the blog post.
Right.
And it just, like, not necessarily things that were bad, but just it's like this kind of this social circle of the cool lingo that everyone's using.
Right.
And you see that now, like with words like woke and based.
Right.
It's like,
yeah,
like we're using those now, and it's kind of fun to use them. But in the school system, it's like if you didn't have those, that vocab, you definitely didn't fit in. Like people would notice. And then on the tired,
you're not. It's obviously you're not part of the group if you're not using their slang.
Yeah, like you didn't fit in just because they were in that system already for 7 years leading up to it, so they all fit in perfectly. And then on the tired and overstimulated point, I definitely could relate to that. Like it's just, I was used to 2 to 4 hours a day of sitting at a table doing my work, and then here I'm thrown into a system where I have to sit in a specific time and a specific place in a specific way. I couldn't sit with my knees up like I do all the time. I couldn't get up and go for a walk when I got frustrated with how to figure something out.
Right. All just things that you would expect a kid to do when they're trying to deal with something. Yeah,
exactly. And it's definitely like to say like, it's based on this idea that we're training people to be factory workers. Like I personally wouldn't be able to argue that is the case. Like I haven't done any research, but when I hear that kind of thing being said, it's like, yes, that's what it feels like. The bell rings, you sit down. The bell rings, you stand up.
Yeah, because that's the way it was done in the 19th century, and in these factories and stuff like this. You had a bell. I mean, that's where they came up with it.
And that also reminds me of, like, here we joke that certain types of jobs are union workers because it's 5:00 and everyone stops their work right away rather than finishing what they're working. It's like that reminds me of the school system where the bell rings, and even if you're mid-sentence on your paper you were writing or whatever, you stop. It's like, well, no, finish your thought, finish your project, get it done so you can.
And see, I think this is especially tough on boys because, boys are just different than girls, and they have, they're more rambunctious, they're more active, they're more, they can't, like you were saying, it's so hard to just sit. And the thing with me was I was successful in school, I think, as a boy, partly because I was just more acclimated to the sitting around thing. Like, I have one brother, and, it was like my mom and dad and me and my brother, and I was normally hanging out with my mom on stuff. And he was like, if we had our preference, I would be hanging out with my mom. He would be hanging out with our dad. And I think that pushed me into, being a little bit better in school. And that's why I did so well. And, as a younger kid and did pretty well in college and, went on, much farther than, normal people do, in school. But, at the same time, it gives you these weird complexes too, right? Because the school system wants you to behave in a certain way, and it is very feminized. And then it's almost like when you get older, you have to figure, I mean, this is why we have so many, like all these memes about like friend zoning and stuff like this, is because we have, 2 entire generations of boys who have, been growing up in this feminized atmosphere, and they don't understand that, like, women want something different from what they are, right? Like, you're not going to attract a mate by acting like a woman, right? You're going to get friend zoned, and so it's such a challenge to, when you have this massive institution, forcing kids into this one mold, right? And it creates this, this bad boy kind of scenario. It's like we're the only the only kids that are even acting something somewhat resembling masculine is, the kids who have behavior problems, you know what I mean? Because they're opposing the system. So I think there's a whole dynamic there. But okay, so number 6, she says, we are at odds with the values being taught in schools. As Christians, we are finding that our values are being degraded in the education system more and more with each passing year. Whether it's through the curriculum or school policies, the educational establishment is at war with truth with a capital T. I will not stand by as my kids are taught things that go against everything we believe in. It's bad enough that they are bombarded with these things through TV shows, movies, and social media. I will not add fuel to the fire by allowing schools to have access to my kids too.
This is probably the number one reason. Like when we were going to homeschool, we wrote down a list, my wife and I, of kind of like the reasons why. And if you go through it, so many of them are based on this point. Like we believe that, that certain things happened and in history and in the way the world works and that way. And the school system doesn't. Even like here we have government funded Catholic schools, right. And they are definitely better, but it's still based on this whole idea that there's someone who knows the truth and they're the ones who are teaching it, and the parents are at odds with that, either that they're wrong or that they don't know.
Right. And
that really bothered us when we were going through reasons to homeschool. And it's just that thing, like who knows. Obviously there's like facts and encyclopedia knowledge and that kind of stuff that, sure, the school system might know better, but that's not all there is in life.
But see, the thing is you can, the reality is you can find the facts very easily on your own. Like, you know what I mean? Like these days, there is no advantage to having a giant library, right? Unless there's some kind of gatekeeper, like, journal articles. But I mean, what 11th grader needs journal articles for Pete's sake to get a basic education, right? They don't. And see, this is what's so pernicious, I think, is that the school system sets up this authority figure that your kids are supposed to buy into. And it's like, okay, but then what you realize is that, okay, when your kid has this authority figure and all of a sudden now you're at odds with that authority figure, now your kid is confused, right? Because now you're telling the kid that they're supposed to do everything the teacher says, but then when the teacher tells them that, we're running out of oil, or, we only have 12 years left before, cars and cow farts destroy the planet, right? I mean, it's like, okay, well now I have to, you know what I mean? I have to push back in some way, even if it's just a clarification on something, or even if it's, walking back, and again, most of these teachers are, again, educated in these, education, schools of education within the universities, and all the professors there are complete, far left progressive lunatics. Like it's just the way it is, and you cannot avoid it. And so when you're at odds with these people, then your kid is confused. So it's not just the fact that they're being taught something that's, stupid or crazy. It's the fact that they're being taught things and told that they have to listen. And then you tell them, well, but don't listen to that. And it's like, okay, well, now I don't understand, Mom. Like now, I'm 12 years old. What do you mean don't listen to them? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And because they're spending more time in the school system than they are out of it, they generally will use that as the truth, and mom and dad are wrong on that issue.
It's like good luck, like, and on top of that, you have, your family and friends, your normie family and friends that are saying like, well, what's wrong with, the way what's wrong with this or that opinion of the teacher? It's like, I mean, come on, man, like just, like it's not so bad, this is the way. And it's like, yeah, well, it's not so bad as like, literally the slope of the slippery slope, right? I mean,
well, yeah. Like, and when they do that kind of comment, it's like that one particular instance that you're talking about, that's not so bad. But then you add everything up and it all builds on top of itself. And eventually you've got this massive thing that's so different than the opinion of your family and your, it's,
I mean, for Pete's sake, we have drag queens, taking nude photos with children, and doing, this weird library. And it's like, whoa, hold on. Like, how did we get here? And it's like, well, you got here because you started at the top of a slope and you said it's not so bad. And now you're here. Right. Okay. So last, number 7, our family can be central as it should be. When you have a child in school, between after school programs, extracurricular activities, and homework, the most important thing is family, is what suffers the most. It's hard to build lasting familiar relationships when there's never any time for, family time. Let's see. When my oldest daughter was the only one left in school, she used to come home and sit in her room for the rest of the day. I barely knew her. Now she's almost 18 and one of my very best friends. We watch shows together, go for walks, and just talk about our dreams, our common interests, and our disagreements. And sometimes just plain goofy stuff. She's a completely different person than she was when she was 13, and I owe a lot of that to homeschooling. Now, let me just disavow some of this. If your kid is your very best friend, you're doing it wrong, right? So I'm not 100% on board with redheadmom8.wordpress.com, but, most of this stuff has been good until we get here. And I'm just like, wait a minute, hold on.
I think she's got a point there too. It's like she has a strong relationship with her daughter.
Yeah, so maybe she's expressing it in the wrong way, but like you're saying, her child is well socialized with her parents, which is like not even something people think of anymore, right? Like, what do you mean I'm parental socialization is a good thing? What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's definitely like even the picture that they've got there of a family sitting on a hillside looking at a view of the mountains is like spending time as a family doing things together is such a foreign concept to some groups. Like when both parents are working full time and you're in school, and then you've got the summer where you go off to a camp and you do other outside of school activities because someone's got to take care of you. You spend so little time as a family that your social circle better than your siblings and your parents.
Right.
And then when you do have a thing like you have a summer vacation week where you go camping or you go to a resort or something, or you've got your various time off like at Christmas, then you're suddenly spending full time with your family and they're almost foreign to you and you don't know how to relate in the same way that you relate with the school kids. Compared to as homeschooling, where for us the weekend is very similar to the weekday. The routines are a little different, but it's like there's nothing about like a normal school day, if you even call it that separates us in any way. And I feel like that helps, especially for like elementary school age kids. There's definitely something there of building strong relationships with someone that you're going to have, at least until you're in your 30s, 40s, as someone close by, assuming you don't move to the other side of the world.
Right. And we have episodes on that, by the way. So
there's a strong reason to connect with your kids and to connect with your siblings that the school system doesn't leave room for it. That's the big issue, is that it takes up so much of your life that you can't do those other things.
Right. Yeah. And I think, in the sense that, how important is this? Well, it's like if you grow up and you're very poorly socialized with your family, especially your immediate family, good grief, then you're going to have you're not going to have the benefits of that support system, right? Because there's always going to be tension there, and it's just not it's just not part of a what you would expect to be a long happy life in a family, right? It's like these formative years are important because after school, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe you're going to have a few friends from school, but in all likelihood, your family's going to be so much more important. And so why not spend more time with them and figure out how to, be, in a social circle with them?
Yeah. And when you're in a school system and like if you for whatever reason you stop going to that school because you have to move or
Mm-hmm.
or the system changes and your education needs are different, and you fall back on your family as the few people that you know in the new situation. It's like, well, hopefully you're good friends with your family and you can know how to interact with your younger siblings and your older siblings in a way that works with their abilities, and you're not just sitting around not knowing what to do because all you know how to do is talk to people your own age.
Yeah. It's such a strange, like, social, I don't know. It's what's sad about it is that the effects of this thing for so long have had so much time to just sort of like, infect the public, that it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. Like, there's this institution that's like ruining our relationships, or at least contributing to the ruination of our relationships, in our most important relationships, and our ability to do something that human beings have been doing for, all of human history, which is associating well with people that are not our age. Right. And it's like in the last 200 years, we've like completely forgotten how to do that almost. And it's because of this institution. And yet everyone is told, like, you have to be part of this institution. And it's just so bizarre.
Yeah. And we kind of give it like we don't give it room for critique or anything like that. Like when they say, oh yeah, you need to do this, it's like, oh, okay, that's what the school tells me to do. Like in many places in Europe, they've got their kids are going into school at ages of like 3 and 4 rather than 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And they don't see that as weird.
Right.
Like I talked to friends in Holland, like when I was a kid too, like I'd talk to my cousins and I'd be like, yeah, I'm homeschooled. They're like, what, you can do that in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is completely lost to all this stuff. I mean, they're, like you mentioned, that in some sense, Canada follows the U.S. on things, but I think both of us are following Europe down this, weird, creepy, dystopian, progressive, rabbit hole, and it's not good. Well, that's great. I think, that's the end of her little blog post thing here. And like I said, I'll have a link to that. And I'm also going to link to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association for our American folks. And if there is something, Levi, if you have some kind of associations for Canadians or something, we'll put those in there too. But thanks for listening, and please support the podcast. Just set us up for, a subscription. We do have the ability to for you to support us monetarily as well on a monthly donation through Anchor. So please explore that if you're enjoying the content. And just as a note, I did take my month off with my mom passing away and stuff like that. But I am back in the saddle here, and so should plan for me to have weekly episodes from here on out. So. Thanks again, Levi, for joining me, and hopefully we will have you on again soon.
As you know, we could use more voices on the traditionalist right, and one of the best ways to do that is with a podcast. I've been using Anchor.fm for this podcast and for another podcast for over a year, and I've really enjoyed it. It's free, and it allows me to upload clips and also to record and edit. It also disperses all of my podcasts to all the major platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. It also allows me to monetize and to collect donations. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. If you want to join me in being a voice for the traditionalist right, download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Thanks for listening to the Trad Dads podcast. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really helps us out.